Actually, I've been reading so much about why NA fails. I wanted to comment on it. Because I feel like predominantly what is missing in solo, like in NA culture, is like personal accountability. And what I mean by that is like the mindset of players just seems so different. Um, not necessarily super different. I think okay. So to be clear, I think there's like two main issues. The first thing is like accountability, and the second thing is I don't think people know what they're supposed to be doing. I don't mean that in a terrible way. I just genuinely think people struggle envisioning what their role is responsible for doing in the game and what is them doing too much and what is doing too little. And I think that's what the biggest issues are, at least from what I've seen in the pro scene in NA. And what I mean by personal accountability, it's because people don't know what exactly they're supposed to do. At least in my experience, right? So this is my experience. I feel like people don't know exactly what they're all supposed to do, and teams usually have a few players that don't really have that. Like they don't have that knowledge of like what is a player pulling too much weight, what is a player pulling too little weight, and people don't really. Staff as well, I think, struggles in seeing, or at least enforcing, who should be pulling more or fewer weight. More or less, maybe. More or less weight. I think that's the correct way to put it. Then why are they there? Because it's just, like, they're still the best, right? Look at it like this. Me personally, I think that, the way League of Legends, a great League of Legends team works is by having 5 individual players that play their roles very well and play their part in the game. What that part exactly is depends on the draft and the players you have, right? I'm of a big belief that, League is like an orchestra. When you join an orchestra, you don't hear the symphony and then play your part along to the symphony. Absolutely not. That would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? And yet that's exactly how people are taught League of Legends as a whole in coaching in Western League of Legends, at least, right? You watch VODs of how a team plays, and then you're expected to play the symphony perfectly by listening to it. Your part. You're supposed to be able to recognize what you need to do individually. At least in my opinion. Right? Just like the people that are playing in an orchestra, they get their own part, right? You get your melody, you have to play it right. It's your responsibility to play it right. And then feedback, right, which is what the coaches are supposed to do, is them listening to the symphony, right, to the finished product, and then picking out the people that are not living up to what the standard should be. And I think that's where, I guess, coaching and play in NA, and I do think it's both. I don't think it's one or the other, and I don't think there's anyone particularly at fault. I actually think our team had similar struggles this year, even though we have really achieved players. For other reasons, perhaps, right? And I'm not trying to say that like things are black and white. I just think that was something that really struck me. And I guess the biggest difference between East and West for me is like, you see it in the solo queue as well, is like the expectations that are put on what your champion is capable of are really clear, right? That's why you have an FF culture, right? Like, because they realize very well, they understand very well, like, what is that champion supposed to do? How much weight can he pull? And how much weight is he going to pull, right? And the game is much more of a team game, at least in my experience when I'm playing solo queue there. I feel like everyone is trying to involve themselves in my game, and I'm involving them in their game. It's a 5v5 game. And I think that's because people really understand that. They really understand the champions and what is pulling your weight and what is not pulling your weight, right? When they get carried, they don't get carried in a way of like, at least I'm talking of good experiences, right? You have griefers too, you have bad players too on every server, right? I'm just saying my best experiences in high MMR in Korea and as well as China. I was quite high in both servers. I guess I felt like people knew when I was carrying how to support me in carrying the game. And when they were carrying, I felt very confident that I could support them because it was a 5v5 game, right? I don't feel that way playing solo queue in Europe. I don't feel that way playing solo queue in NA. And I think it seeps into competitive play, where even at the competitive level, some of the best players, I don't think they really have even if they have a grasp of what great play, like what it should look like, because of the stress of wanting to make worlds, wanting to win the championship, going, losing scrims, not really understanding why sometimes. I think people lose track of the simplicity, the going back to the basics of what is League, which is basically you have your draft, and everyone understands in your team on who is supposed to do what, like who is progressing the game, who's farming and scaling, who's, everyone has their own role in every draft that you play, right? And obviously the best drafts have aligned goals, but I think that that's something that people struggle with a lot, and it's something I realize is, like, I don't think the biggest difference between me and academy players or me and ERL players is the laning phase. I actually don't think so at all. In terms of raw laning strength, you've seen, amateur players go up against the best in the world and do fine. I'll give you an example. Do you consider Revenge to be a better or a worse player than Zeus? And yet, Revenge is good enough to play 1v1 against Zeus to practice matchups, right? Like, Zeus doesn't consider that a waste of time. Like, he can do that, and he gains valuable practice. It's not because skill in League of Legends in a role is not determined by how well you lane. It's after the laning phase, how much influence you have on the game. I think something that people really struggle with is, how much influence should I have? How much influence is too little, and how much influence is too much, right? It's hard to have too much influence, right? But sometimes you try to do too many things. I'm a victim of that very often in my competitive games, or my solo queue for that matter. I try to do too many things. But ultimately, when feedback time comes around and you're in a team and a certain player always performs really well on a certain pick, you lose track of, is this guy pulling this much weight because he's just that good, or is that normal? And this is where the staff part comes in of what I mentioned, is like, I do think it's also in part the staff, right? For example, is it normal that your top laner can play pretty much every single champion into Aatrox at World Finals and do well? No. Aatrox was the strongest top laner on the patch. Zeus shouldn't have been expected to be able to lane into every single Aatrox player with pretty much, like, with Jace, with Yone, with Gwen, with Fiora, like, regardless of what champion, he can lane against Aatrox well. By by nature of the tournament, as well as the champion, he had like 99% presence, as well as like a 60-something% win rate. By that sense, right, he's really OP statistically. And if you check the eye test, like, sure, you could counterpick him with Fiora and put him in the ground, but it wasn't like that was happening 1v1, right? There was more to it. That only really happened when there was a player discrepancy. Against equally skilled opponents, Aatrox was not really getting crushed by Fiora at Worlds. In fact, I'm going to pull up the stats, because right now I'm kind of talking out of my ass. So how about we pull up the stats so I can confirm that. Apologies, I should have done that first. World Championship, right? Main event. Top 4 regions. Let's check Aatrox. And you check the stats. Let's count the games, right? Let me actually get out of queue and pull this up, right? Because I think it's an interesting topic. Check the stats here. So let's count the Fiora games, right? You have 1 Fiora game. So I'm gonna make it easier. I don't have the tool here, but it says here, right? Aatrox is going even with Fiora over multiple games, right? How many exactly? I would say it's 6-2. It's probably 6-2. I'm guessing is what the win rate is. 83.3%. It's like 6 out of 8 wins. Let me double check this. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, 4 and 2, I guess. Let me double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so 4 and 2. So out of 6 games that the champion was played at Worlds into Fiora, which was the prime counter pick, he actually went even on average and won most games. The reason why I'm bringing this up in Zeus's context is I also think T1 kind of lost track of that. Of like, is it expected for Zeus to counter the champion and win or be in a good position in the game? No. That's the situation they put him in, though. And that might be because he had the confidence to pull it off, or maybe that's something they deemed necessary. I'm not trying to blame anyone. I'm not trying to say that was a bad idea or a good idea. I don't have the context to know. That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is people lose track of how much a champion is supposed to do, or how little a champion is supposed to do. And I think that's actually the biggest issue in NA. There's not enough players that have, or staff, that have great understanding of this concept and enforce it consistently to create an equal balance that doesn't make specific players on your team feel like they're pulling too much weight, or make them feel like people are pulling too little weight and they have to do too much. And that's obviously very tough, right? If you're in a work environment and you feel like you're pulling way more weight than everyone else is, I'm not even saying that you are or aren't. Irrelevant whether the fact that you are or aren't, if you feel that way, it's going to affect your performance. Generally speaking, in my experience, perhaps at first it will be positive, but at some point you will burn out, right? Every time you will work, you feel like you have to work harder than everyone else because people are not as committed, because you're pulling more weight. People don't even notice that you're pulling more weight, but that's how you feel. And I'm guessing this is what's happening, right? I'm guessing that if you're scrimming in NA, I'll tell you this much: if you're scrimming as a European team or an NA team against Eastern teams, you're getting your shit kicked in. You're gonna lose a lot. And in those scrims, there's always going to be a few players that are going to pull through. They are going to consistently manage to lane or play well, depending on what matchups they have, the way the team is drafting. There's almost always going to be someone that's going to be playing well. And I think that not acknowledging that this player is playing well and making sure that he understands that it's everyone else that has to play to his standard, I think this is somewhat what is happening. I wouldn't be surprised if this is happening, right? So the players that's pulling through isn't getting praised, isn't getting enough attention, because all the attention is on like, fuck, we have this problem and this problem and this problem and this problem and this problem, and we're getting our shit kicked in, and we're always losing, and it's always this and it's always that. And as a result, that player slowly starts deteriorating, right? Because he loses focus on what's making him play well in those scrims where his team is getting shit on. He's trying to focus on how can I translate my lead into something meaningful to actually win the game. And I'm speaking out of experience. I've had those moments. I actually think that this is one of the reasons why my playoffs runs are really bad this year, because I was struggling with this, right? And whether it was justified or not, I'm not trying to justify my performance in the playoffs I played last year. They were pretty bad. I think I played very bad in both playoff series, in the official matches that I played. But the point I'm trying to make is, like, I'm just trying to help people understand, like, for example, why did Zeus collapse? This is another perspective that you can perhaps understand. Maybe that's what was happening, right? Maybe that's what they felt like was going on. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's completely different. And then finally, I would like to finish the point with, like, why did DRX win in the end? And I think it's because they had a really good understanding of how much is necessary. You know, what is the bare minimum for a contribution to victory? What should you do minimum in the game in order to contribute for that team to win? Because it was by the skin of their teeth that they won Worlds in multiple series. And I think that they were very good at demanding that minimum from their players, both from a staff as well as from individual players, that they got the upper hand over other teams that had a harder time paying attention to that. I just wanted to share that perspective, because like I said, like, ultimately I do think that's like the biggest issue in NA, and I think that players, when they are playing poorly and getting carried, they don't spend enough effort to make the people that are carrying feel good about that and letting them know, like, I'm going to play up to your standard. I also don't think there's enough focus on that from a staff perspective. And this is speculation, right? I only have experience from my team, and I think that definitely that could have been improved. I'm not saying that it never happened. I just think that that's something that could have definitely gotten better this year for us. And making very clear, like, hey, this guy is pulling way more weight than he should be, and you guys need to play up to his standard, right? And I think that everyone that watched TL play this year can point out to several different moments in the year where it was different players on our team that had that, right? Where, you know, Sarn had really good moments in the year where we weren't playing up to his standard. You know, Santorin's a great example. Core, Hans, like, definitely. I think we all took turns, and we didn't really ever reach a simultaneous high, I guess, other than week 1 in summer, which was kind of a pretty depressing high if it was only 1 week. But I think that is a big reason. And And I do think it's also the culture plays a big part. You know, it's not just the professional culture that matters. I think that whilst Eastern regions, so like China and Korea, in my experience, have like an FF culture where it's like people give up. I think people give up when they realize there is no hope. You know, like, I don't see how we can win this game, so I don't see why we should play it out. It's not like, oh, this guy frustrated me, let's FF. At least that's my experience. Again, and I have to say, most of my experience is playing in high MMR in those regions, right? So I did not get stuck in Master Tier or D2 in D2 Elo Hell in Korea or China. So I can't speak for that. You know, most of my games are in high MMR with challenger players. And it felt like whenever people FF'd there, it was just like, well, the game is just not winnable. We don't see how. Here, I feel like people FF when they get pissed off at each other. Same in Europe, to be honest. Like, someone pissed you off? Ah, fuck this guy, let's FF.